fertility is Buckholz's symptom number 2.
This was a hospital. This is where my kids were born. Lots of DC kids were born here, but it's not a hospital anymore. It's condos. You know, throughout the world, throughout history, when countries get rich, they stop having kids.
Because who needs them?
Rich countries don't need as many children. We used to need kids to work in the fields as farmhands, to crawl on their bellies into coal mines. Well, kids are more like luxury objects now.
So the richer we get, the fewer kids we have. But is that a bad thing?
You need somebody to support the retirees. You need to pay into the pension plans. You need people to work at the hospitals, at the nursing homes. If you haven't produced enough babies to do that...
Congratulations on becoming a citizen of the greatest...
You need immigration, supposed symptom number 3.
It was a tremendous advantage for the United States for most of the 20th century. But if you have waves of immigration, you better figure out a way to turn those immigrants into red-blooded Americans, or else you end up splintering the society.
Look at today's anti-immigrant backlash, says Buckholz, against those who learn very little English, practice a different religion, come here illegally. Like we were told, some of these day laborers from Mexico and Central America. They shape up at the parking lot next to our NewsHour headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, hoping for the most basic work. Luis Hernandez gets hired 2 to 3 days a week, he says, at $15 an hour and up.
Renovation, yeah. And the kitchen, bathroom, the floors.
Hernandez sends money back to his family in Guatemala. Jose Reyes sends money back to Honduras to support his wife and 3 kids.
How much do you send back?
Maybe 500 or 600.
I admire these men for working so hard on behalf of their wives and their children. But when they're doing the work and then sending the money back home, we do have to ask, does that really contribute as much to the American economy as if they were devoted to actually being here and staying here?
But there are immigrants serving as doctors in hospitals, professors at universities. They come, they stay, they contribute, no?
It's a good thing we have immigrant doctors and immigrant engineers, because if you or I get sick this afternoon, we're going to go to the hospital. We're going to hope someone serves us.
But these workers are doing work almost anyone could do, illustrating a 4th price of prosperity. As a country gets richer, claims Buckholz, its work ethic tends to erode. Tony Barajas is the site's coordinator.
Why wouldn't Americans, many of whom are still out of work, not take jobs like this where you can show up and make, what, $700 a week, something like that?
Yeah. Nobody wants to do those jobs, and I know it's kind of cliche to even say that, but that is the fact.
Maybe for pay too cheapy, you know, it may be the job is too hard too, you know.
And while these guys wait for work, many legal Americans their age can afford to do otherwise.
We're prosperous enough that we can afford to have 1 in 6 able-bodied men of working age sitting at home playing video games.
Last stop on our Price of Prosperity tour, Theodore Roosevelt Island, splitting the Potomac between Virginia and D.C., and a backdrop for Buckholz's conclusion.
When Teddy Roosevelt was around, there was an Ottoman Empire. There was a Habsburg Empire. They controlled millions of people across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and they're gone. Prosperity killed them because they didn't have a way to hold the people together. They didn't have the rituals and the holidays and the pride in their country. And that's what we need if we're going to hold ourselves together during periods of prosperity.
So Buckholz has remedies. Big tax credits for having more kids, bonuses for starting to work young, and for getting off unemployment insurance, making immigrants and students applying for federal loans visit patriotic sites like this one.
I would require them to get their passport stamped not just at JFK or whatever airport they arrive at. I would require them to go to at least 5 national monuments or museums. Maybe here at Teddy Roosevelt Island, or the Smithsonian, or the Museum of Tolerance. to demonstrate that they are trying to learn something about American history. And you know what? I would require the same thing of American students.
I had one final question.
Do you think the rancor of this election is symptomatic of the kind of dissolution of America you're talking about?
I think this is a corrosive election, and I think it does reflect deep divisions and distrust of our fellow countrymen. Half of Americans look at the other half and say they're too lazy or they're not willing to get up and go to school. And the other half looks and sees a bunch of fat cats and talks about income inequality.
Hardly a new theme in often contentious America, but it sure seems at odds with hopeful sanctuaries of the past, like Teddy Roosevelt Island. For the PBS NewsHour, this is economics correspondent Paul Salman reporting from Washington, D.C.
The tradition of rebirth is a central tenet in the Buddhist religion, and when spiritual leaders or lamas die, there's an elaborate process of identifying their reincarnation. It's usually an infant. One such young lama was identified a few years ago far away from his Himalayan roots. Special correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro reports from Minnesota.
They are chants more likely heard in a Himalayan monastery than a working-class Minneapolis suburb. But it's here in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, that 9-year-old Jalu Dorje begins the day in a routine of Tibetan Buddhist mantras, coached by his father. A bit later, there are house calls from volunteer teachers in modern Tibetan, in the calligraphy of the ancient scriptures.
He has really motivation to learn, and especially, even I know him, he's tired, but he said, no, I'm not tired, I want to continue, you know. So that really motivated me also to teach him.
It's a fitting trait because Jalu Dorje has been recognized as a reincarnation of Thaksem Karma Yongdu Choki Nima, an eminent senior lama or spiritual leader who died 9 years ago. He would be the 8th reincarnation of the first Thaksem Lama, who lived in the 16th century. In Tibetan tradition, the process of recognizing a reincarnate varies, depending on circumstances. Spiritual masters divine from a variety of signals. In the case of Jalu Dorje, it was the dream of a senior monk who had visited Jalu's home in Minnesota, which is home to some 3,000 Tibetan Americans, the second in size only to New York. In that dream, tigers roamed in every room of Jalu's house. It was a critical clue in the search for the Thaksem Lama's reincarnation.
The Thaksem Lamas, they used to wear a skirt of the tiger skin. Then I also thought, oh, it might be, you know, because Thaksem Lama was passed away a year before, and everybody's trying to find out his reincarnation.
The question of whether that reincarnation is indeed Jalu Dorje went all the way up to the Dalai Lama, spiritual head of Tibetan Buddhism.
Then His Holiness' prediction was the same, and many other high lamas. So he was confirmed.
In the old days, the boy would be moved to a monastery in Tibet, or now in India, where the Dalai Lama and thousands of followers have lived in exile since 1959. However, the Dalai Lama suggested that Jalu's monastic education be deferred until he's a bit older. The spiritual leader has emphasized that Tibetans, or all Buddhists, must reconcile their traditional belief system with the modern world.
I always see it appealing. We Buddhists should be 21st century Buddhists.
For Jalu Dorje, that means immersion in ceremony and scripture on one hand, and on the other, a fairly typical 21st century Minnesota upbringing. Soccer and swimming are favorite pastimes, as are more sedentary ones, isolated in headphones and a laptop computer. All this will soon change drastically in a Himalayan monastery, perhaps in a couple of years, though an exact date has not yet been determined. After about 10 years in India, he is to return to Minnesota as a spiritual leader. when you grow older and you've completed your studies, what do you think you'll be doing for people?
I'll be praying for them. I'll be chanting for them.
When I asked what those chants mean, he responded after consulting with his dad, who sat in on our conversation.
It's like meanings of how to help, how your body works. Aba, peja lodugala, kariga meaning to be nice, to be have peace, and yeah.
Not every young Lama embraces the rigorous altruistic calling of meditation and service to others. The modern world can be filled with distraction. All this adds pressure on Jalu's parents, who labor long hours doing janitorial jobs in Minneapolis. Devout Buddhists, they say they were honored and a bit awed when they learned of the boy's recognition, something that has even brought them into close quarters with the Dalai Lama.
It was the first time in my 40 years I got to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It is overwhelming for me because ordinary people don't normally have the opportunity to meet him.
I'm happy that he has the chance to learn about the modern world as well as the Eastern spiritual wisdom, both combined right from childhood. It's going to be good.
But like every other parent of a 9-year-old, he has strategies, mainly an incentive system to keep his son on task. Every time you memorize a set of scriptures, do you get a toy at Target, like a set of Pokemon cards or something?
Yeah, mostly that.
He's learning to strike a balance in life, even as ceremonial obligations are being added to his routine. At this gathering, celebrating the birthday of the Karmapa Lama, a major spiritual leader, Dorje came prepared with a book that's popular with grade school readers. So what did you bring to read today?
Diary of a Wimpy Kid, old school.
Did you bring Pokemon cards?
I snuck them.
Does Dad know that?
No.
So we agreed to keep it a secret between him and the television audience. For the record, the Pokemon cards remained out of sight, and Jalu Dorje remained as attentive as any adult through the 3-hour ceremony. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred DeSan Lazaro in Columbia Heights, Minnesota.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, and a version of this report aired on the PBS program Religion and Ethics News Weekly.
Now to another in our brief but spectacular series where we ask interesting people to share their passions. Tonight we hear from Anthony Bourdain, who sheds light on kitchens around the planet for his CNN series Parts Unknown, and whose book, Appetites, was released just this week.
How did I get from, dunking breaded clams in hot grease to where I am today? If I know. This is the kind of angry, extremely unpleasant person I was in college. I actually walked around campus with nunchucks and would show up at the occasional social function bearing a samurai sword. I look back on that now with some embarrassment. But then again, what were you wearing in the 70s? I wanted to become a heroin addict. I was very proud of myself when I first shot up. I was a vulnerable, goofy, awkward guy whose only success socially was to be the baddest guy in the room. And ultimately, however, you end up a whiny, pathetic, needy person. I learned every important lesson that I ever really needed in the rest of my life as a dishwasher. It was the first time in my life that I went home respecting myself. In the good old, bad old days, there was definitely a hazing period in the European tradition anyway. And there's a part of me that kind of misses that. On the other hand, hitting people in the workplace is probably not, on balance, a good thing. I like food where the guiding principle is you have 3 or 4 good ingredients, and the most important thing is to just not screw them up. Treat them with a little respect. All America, who cook in their backyard, insist on ruining a perfectly good hunk of meat again and again and again. Just leave the thing alone. Let it rest. Yeah, food may not be the answer to world peace, but it's a start. I think I was thinking of Ted Nugent. I find just about everything that comes out of his mouth violently offensive. But we both like barbecue. That is some kind of common ground for a discussion, and surely that's not a bad thing. The grandma rule is this: If I'm going to Grandma's house, I will eat what Grandma puts on the plate, and I will smile and ask for seconds and say, thank you, Grandma. That's really my problem with vegetarians. I respect your personal lifestyle choice. Actually, I don't, screw you, but let's pretend that I do. All of my relationships with people around the world begin when I express an interest and a willingness to respect their traditions behind what they put on my plate. So if I were to sit there and say, I don't know, I can't, do you have a spinach salad? That would be interpreted as insulting in most cultures. It is both a blessing and a curse to me that no matter what happens in my life, I can always go back to brunch. Nobody wants to cook brunch. Society apparently needs people to cook brunch in spite of its ridiculousness. If this TV thing doesn't work out, there's always a brunch gig. My name is Anthony Bourdain, and this is my brief but spectacular take on my hunger.
Sorry, we didn't know him in college.
You lost one vegetarian viewer right there.
Okay. And you can watch additional brief but spectacular episodes on our website, pbs.org/newshour/brief. On the NewsHour online right now, a new study finds that the perception that boys do better than girls in math starts in kindergarten, despite efforts to change the culture by encouraging greater confidence in girls. Also, areas afflicted by violence from Boko Haram are now suffering a new nightmare. You can find a photo essay of children and their mothers who are victims of a hunger crisis in Nigeria. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour.
On Charlie Rose tonight, the cast of The Crown, a new Netflix series on the life of Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Hari Srinivasan.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening with Mark Shields and David Brooks. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you and good night.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by XQ Institute, BNSF Railway, Lincoln Financial, committed to helping you take charge of your financial future. The Lemelson Foundation, committed to improving lives through invention in the U.S. and developing countries. On the web at lemelson.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The PBS NewsHour, your home for politics.
This is not something you could support.
You want to paint in bold colors.
Reporting from around the world.
So why is this place such a crossroads?
Stories with impact that inspire, engage. On health, making economic sense, education, science and technology, and the arts. Every night on PBS.
Election 2016 on PBS.
On Masterpiece Classic.
Something happening in this house is actually about me.
Anthony Strabon is the most traditional choice.
Edith is beginning her life as an old man's drudge.
So it is cancer.
Don't say anything.
So this is the moment when you receive a huge fortune that could save Downton and you give it away.
Darling, I hope you can understand.
I'm trying.
Downton Place. Where am I to go?
We still own most of the village.
Perhaps I could open a shop.
Downton Abbey on Masterpiece Classic.
Tonight at 8:30.
Tonight we will experience a low of 45 degrees. Tomorrow will be a high of 75 degrees. And tomorrow night will be a low of 58 degrees. And here's our 5-day weather forecast.
Cooking with WSIU offers a lineup of cooking programs featuring mouth-watering recipes from some of the nation's best. Tune in each and every Saturday morning and start cooking with WSIU.
On Masterpiece.
Any man will betray his friends if the price is right.
I'm a gentleman, sir. And she is an heiress.
All I know for certain is I'm my own mistress, yet no freer to follow my heart. Uncle Ross looks after us so well.
Having a husband's a little bit like going to church. You either believe in something or you don't.
How will I repay the Wallagas?
Why can you not appeal to your friends?
Sum is too great.
You mean your pride is?
Poldark on Masterpiece.
Sunday at 8.
You're watching WSIU Carbondale, WUSI.
Support comes from the Carson Center in Paducah, presenting Jackie Evancho in concert, Saturday, December 17th at 7. Tickets on sale October 21st at the Carson Center box office or carsoncenter.org.
Support comes from Marion Subaru, offering sales and service of the full line of Subaru models, including the 2016 Impreza 4-door sedan with all-wheel drive and up to 37 miles per gallon. Route 13 in Marion and MarionSubaru.com. Support comes from Forbes Financial Group, Carbondale, helping people identify financial goals, develop individual plans, monitor results, and adapt to changing needs. ForbesFinancialOnline.com. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA.
Next, This Old House Hour, sad front porch comes tumbling down.
The puzzle for us today is how to get cooling to the second floor.
Good evening, and welcome to the first and only formal broadcast debate by the three candidates running for Congress in the 12th Illinois U.S. House District. The candidates are C.J. Barasevic, Democrat of Belleville, Paula Bradshaw of the Green Party from Carbondale, and U.S. Representative Mike Bost, Republican from Murfreesboro. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we need to get going. The candidates will be questioned by Joseph Bustos of the Belleville News Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Broadcasting, and Molly Parker of the Southern Illinois Newspaper. I'm Jack Titchener from WSIU Public Broadcasting. I'll be the moderator tonight. We're going to start with a 2-minute opening statement from each of the candidates, the order of which was determined by a drawing by the candidates before the debate. C.J. Barasevic will start things off.
Thank you very much. Son. Hello. Does this work? Can you hear me? Yeah?
We can hear you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen. Let's let him get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for letting me be here. My name is C.J. Barasevic, and I'm here to ask for your vote to be your next congressman in this district. I'm running to be your voice in Washington. For 24 years, we had that voice in Jerry Costello, and that voice is gone. We don't have a voice. You are not heard. I want to be the voice for working people, for you, and not big business and Washington special interests. Here's what happens when you have a voice. I've already fought Governor Rauner and beat him in court on behalf of labor. I've already addressed the failing levee districts in Southern Illinois and fixed them without a dime of taxpayer money. I have handled infrastructure issues in the district. I believe that we can't stand for unfair trade deals that ship our jobs abroad. I believe that college should be affordable, and believe me, I know what I'm talking about there. I believe that women should be paid the exact same thing as men, and my opponent does not. Mike Bost voted against equal pay in the workplace. Think about that for a second. Against it. He's voted in favor of unfair trade deals. He's voted against college affordability with the budget. He's voted to turn Medicare into a voucher system that will change the way that we know it. We have a real opportunity here in the 12th District. We're going to face challenges that will fundamentally change how the future is written. And this is your opportunity to have a voice. So let's move forward and let's be heard together. And on November 8th, let me be your voice.
Our next response comes from, folks, I really need you to stop between the candidates because we've got to stay on time. Thanks very much. Paula Bradshaw.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you to the Southern Illinois and the BND and WSIU for holding this debate and for trying to hold other debates. I know that they struggled very hard to have other debates. I kept getting the emails. Will you show up in Carbondale? Yeah, I will. Will you show up in Marion? Yeah, I'll show up in Marion. Will you show up in Fairview Heights? Yeah, I'll show up in Fairview Heights. And yet, somehow, the boys couldn't make it, and so we only have this one debate. When you talk about having a voice in Washington, D.C., the reason, I think everyone knows why the people don't have a voice in Washington, D.C., or in their state legislatures for that matter. It's because the corrupting influence of big money on our politics. Recently, I went to the Carbondale Library, one of the wonderful things about government and truly underfunded, and I saw a presentation about Granny D. I don't know if you remember who she was. When she was 90 years old in the year 2000, she walked 3,000 miles across this United States for campaign finance reform because she said the big sums of money in this country are corrupting our government. And people back then knew that big money corrupted government. That year, 2000, $3 billion was spent on the elections in the United States of America. And she was supporting the McCain-Feingold bill, which, as John McCain put it, the U.S. political process is an influence peddling scheme in which both parties compete to sell out the country to the highest bidder. And they did pass that law, and the Supreme Court did overthrow it. And in 2012, the election system cost $6 billion. This year, we don't even know how much it's going to cost, but this election is being treated like an auction where people are reporting how much money each candidate gets. We know that the presidential loan is going to be over $1 billion.
Time.
You're not going to have a voice till this stops.
Representative Bost.
Thank you. First off, let me say thank you to the panelists and thank you to WSIU and the Belleville News Democrat, Southern Illinoisan, for putting on the debate. Let me tell you that my experience in the Illinois 12th, where I've grown up and lived there all my life, let me also say this. I've worked side by side with people in the mines when I hauled blasting agent to the mines. I've worked side by side with my union firefighter brothers. So I understand what it's like for both union and management and how to come up with a balance. It's a great honor for me to serve as your congressman. Let me tell you that since we first took office, we've hit the ground running to do everything we can, and every vote I've made is about Southern Illinois. Now let me tell you, I think you're going to hear a little bit of rhetoric today, because sometimes, I don't know if you know this or not, there are votes that come up that are amendments that are ingermane to the bill, and sometimes you have to vote no on those amendments when they're there so that you can actually allow government to work. They do it almost every time at the end of the debates and before moving forward with a bill. And so a lot of the things you're going to hear tonight of how I voted were put just in there for that. Let me tell you, nobody believes in Southern Illinois and will work harder for them than I have and that I will continue to do. And I'm going to ask one more thing, if I can, is that, please, those who support me, let's follow the rules of the debate and let's keep it quiet, and that way we can answer all the questions. Thank you.
It's time now for questions from our panelists. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question. The first question comes from Joseph Bustos of the Belleville News Democrat for Mr. Bearsevic.
When the talk turns to jobs in this region, many leaders still point to coal and manufacturing as the way back to prosperity. What plans do you have to move the regions included in your district into a new technology world, or in the other directions to provide long-term, good-paying jobs that will keep people here?
So coal is absolutely very relevant in this district. And frankly, we cannot move forward with jobs without having the conversation about coal. In fact, there's been proposed legislation on the House that Mr. Bost has failed to support, like the Carbon Capture Act that had unanimous bipartisan support that he would not get behind. We live in a reality that we are negatively affecting our climate, that climate change is a real thing. But the economic tragedy of Southern Illinois' economy is leaving workers behind. We need to appropriately fund coal and coal-burning plants so that they're clean. We need to publicly invest in private enterprise. And we need to work on transition for our workers as we move forward. The 12th District can be a great place for new jobs and new technology, particularly green jobs and green technologies. But we have to be willing to invest. We cannot leave our workers behind. We have to make sure that we move forward appropriately. Now, Mr. Bost has taken a lot of money from coal companies. And frankly, that puts him in an awkward position. I don't think he can fundamentally move forward and have that conversation because he's so loyal to those companies. We need to invest in our workers. We need to invest in our infrastructure. And hopefully, as we move forward, the 12th District can be a great place for new technologies.
Ms. Bradshaw.
The coal mining jobs in this Southern Illinois are no longer union jobs. They no longer have good benefits. They no longer have good pay. They no longer have pensions. And we can see what happened to the pensions that the UMW did have with Peabody Coal when the company decided to go bankrupt and take the money from the workers before they took it from the executives. We need to switch to solar energy and wind power, which already employs more people than coal mining at very good wages. Every 2 years, since the 60s, I guess, the Congress people have come up here and told you, yeah, coal's going to come back, coal's going to come back. And since the 60s, coal mining jobs have been lost, even when we're mining more coal in Southern Illinois than we did 10 years ago, but with fewer workers. So no, that's not going to happen. It is a false promise. As far as the government investing in private for-profit companies, I think we've had 36 years of corporate welfare, and we should know by now, if you're not a slow learner, you should know this sort of thing does not trickle down. The Humphrey-Hawkins Act of 1978, which was voted on by then Congressperson from here, Paul Simon, back when the Democrats actually did something, said that if the unemployment rate in the United States of America got above 3%, that's what it was considered outrageous back in the 70s, that the government would step in and do another New Deal kind of program where the government would directly employ workers, not give corporate welfare to corporations and hope that they come up with some jobs. Directly employ workers, and that's what the Green New Deal is about, directly employing workers at living wage jobs to change to renewable energy, sustainable transportation, and other socially uplifting programs.
Representative Bost.
Thank you, Jack. Well, let me tell you that, first off, I'll quickly respond to the carbon bill that CJ talked about. Let me tell you, once again, that shows he doesn't understand the district. Nowhere in the district does that affect a single power plant. Had someone from the district that it does ask me to join in that bill, I would have. I've supported every coal bill that's out there. And let me explain it to you this way. Only one of us have the head of our party who has actually offered to shut down every coal mine that exists. Only one. I can tell you that since Obama's been president, 600 rules have been written through administration to try to shut down coal. We had another plant closed down the other day. Folks, I've worked side by side with the people in those coal mines. My family were coal miners. And to tell you the truth, you're doggone right I support those coal companies. But I also support green energy as well. But right now, it's not soup. We've got 6% in Illinois. 6% of our energy is generated by wind and solar. 6%. And that has to be the wind has to be blowing, the sun has to be shining. So I am in for coal, and I believe in coal. And so much so that the United Mine Workers have endorsed me. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to fight for Illinois coal. It makes no sense to have our coal shipped overseas and burnt in power plants that have no scrubbers. It's the same atmosphere. So let's burn it here. Let's burn it cleanly. I worked on the Illinois Clean Coal Council in the state of Illinois for 20 years, putting technology in place that provides the quality coal burning plants.
Next question is for Paula Bradshaw from Jennifer Fuller.
The nominees of each political party at this point have unfavorable ratings that are higher than their favorables. How would you fix the party's selection process for their nominees for president?
Well, as I said, this is an auction, not a selection. The party nominees obviously were not in the case of Trump, the party overlords clearly did not want him. But in the case of Clinton, it's very obvious that the party overlords wanted her, and so they rigged the election to choose her over the popular candidate, Bernie Sanders. In terms of how we pick our nominee, well, we just go for the best one. And it's, there's no lobbyist money, there's absolutely no corporate cash. We just listen to what they say and pick the one we like the best, and that would be Jill Stein, who is a very, very smart woman. She's a Harvard-trained medical doctor, and she switched from clinical medicine to environmental medicine, so she says, and is working to bring the Green New Deal, which would bring good jobs to America and to Southern Illinois. I don't know whether UNW would endorse someone from Southern Illinois when there hasn't been any new union coal mines in a very long time. And the union coal mines that we had were shut down and then reopened with non-union people, so I don't understand that at all. And working on clean coal for 20 years and still not having clean coal, I think at a certain point you have to say, yeah, that dog don't hunt.
Mr. Bost. Mr. Bost.
Can you repeat the question? I think we went off somewhere.
The nominees for president from each of the political parties have unfavorable ratings that are higher at this point than their favorables. How would you fix your party's selection process?
Well, as Paula said, the Republicans, the people spoke. Now, I believe that even though the party heads might not have agreed with who it is, the voting public gets to make that decision. Now, the Democrat process in the Democrat Party, maybe she was right in questioning that. But that is for each party to make their own decision. And regardless of how you feel about the nominees, they got the required amount of votes. They won. And this system has worked for all these many years under this great nation. We kind of got some rough ones right now. But we'll have to get through that. But we let the people vote and let the people make the decisions because, folks, this is a place where every vote should count. And every vote should get out. Every person should get out and vote. Now, let me tell you that I think everybody should vote once. But the thing is, the people need to speak. That's why this nation works, and it works well. We might be real upset with this election right now. But what the bright side about this is that come next week or come 10 days from now, 12 days from now, we're going to have an election. And somebody's going to win. And come January, we're all going to stand up, those of us who have been elected, and stand there at that White House and watch that new president come in. And we're not going to go up in arms and we're not going to fight. We may disagree. But I thank God for this nation. I thank God for the ability to vote. I thank God that we have this party, these systems.
Mr. Bersevic.
Thank you. Listen, I understand why people are upset with the heads of both parties, with the presidential nominees of both parties. You have one candidate who's been in public office since the 70s. You have another candidate who appears to be motivated by hate. And when Mr. Boss suggests to me that the head of my presidential candidate has said she would close all the coal mines, remember, we immediately rebuked her for that. We immediately said that's not our policy. Mr. Boss just told you the fundamental issue that I have with his presidential nominee, that he will not accept the results of a Democratic election. So when Mr. Boss says things like, these processes have worked for so long, not according to the head of his party, not according to Donald Trump, here's what we can do to fix the party process. Paula was right. There is way too much money in politics. It's unbelievable. Citizens United was embarrassing. And what Citizens United does as a Supreme Court decision has given super PACs, big money, dark money, the folks that contribute to Mike Boss' campaign, gives them the ability to fundamentally donate and promote singular candidates. There's what's called a transparency record when we go and talk about who's donated to who, meaning what dollar can we directly trace to an individual donor. Our rating's about 85%. Mr. Boss' rating is 55%. 45% of the money that he's using to run for office is dark money. We don't know where it comes from. If we can eliminate big money in politics, if we can get rid of the mega wealthy and the big businesses donating to these candidates' campaigns, if we can stop the inherent lobbying and partisan politics inherent in Washington, then I think we can at least start to have the conversation of getting candidates in office that people like.
Next question is from Molly Parker for Congressman Bost.
Many rural communities in the region are losing population as young people seek jobs and culture in more urban areas. What would you propose we do as a nation to slow or perhaps even reverse this hollowing out of middle America, or the rural brain drain as it was described by two sociologists who wrote a book on this topic?
Well, let me tell you what we've already done, and let me tell you what we can continue to do. One thing that I've worked very closely on, understand I'm on Ag Committee, I'm on Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'm Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. But one thing we did with Ag was we set a different standard for the ability for low-interest loans for families that want to remain on the farm, and so we were able to move forward with that. But that's not the only thing. We've got to stop the overburdensome bureaucracies that continue to drive people out of our areas where we can provide those jobs, whether it's coal, whether it is the trucking industries. All of these issues are being overburdened. Like I said before, 600 rules coming out of on and against coal. Those rules actually cost the American taxpayer, no, not the taxpayers, each individual citizen in the United States, $2,200 per year. Those are what those rules have done, and they will continue to bog us down. And it's not just rural jobs, it's jobs in inner cities, and it's jobs around this nation. And we've got to realize that we've got to be on a competitive playing field with the rest of the world. And until we get those regulations rolled back, and what we are doing is there's the REINS Act, and the REINS Act basically says that if one of these agencies is going to pass a rule, and it is a larger rule, it must come before Congress. Most states have that anyway, but the federal government does not, and I think that's exactly what we need to be doing, and we'll continue to work in that direction.
Mr. Bursevic.
Here's one of the great ways that we promote great jobs in the shrinking middle class is we stop voting for unfair trade deals that disadvantage labor, that are drawn up by big businesses. My opponent voted for the Fast Track Authority for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a deal that inherently ships jobs abroad. In 2015, this district lost 4,000 manufacturing jobs to bad trade deals. That's a huge issue, and that's where it needs to start. We also need to advocate for the district. That's something that we just don't do very well right now as a district. We lost the National Geospatial Agency, an agency that would have provided over 3,500 permanent jobs and 10,000 construction jobs because we couldn't deliver the mail there. Those are big issues. We need to go out to businesses and remind them that this is a great place to live and to work. We need to be good advocates for the district. We don't have that right now. We need to have these conversations not just in halls like this, but in offices of big businesses. We need to bring business back to Belleville. We need to bring business back to Jackson and Franklin County and Jefferson County. We need to work for the district. When Mr. Boss started talking to you, he talked about excuses. He talked about things that, may have been inserted in a bill that prevented or encouraged him to vote one way or the other that wasn't germane to the bill itself. Well, that's what you're getting right now is excuses, and we can do better, and we need a voice.
Ms. Bradshaw.
I would have to agree with you there, CJ. On the TPP fast track, that wasn't you voting against something that you didn't believe in. That was you voting for something that is horrible for United States workers as well as workers around the world. As far as a brain drain goes, the hollowing out of our best and brightest, if you look at the concentration of wealth in this country, let's say you had $100 as our total wealth, and our citizens, total citizens were 100 people. The top person, the 1% we call him, would have $35 of that wealth. The top 10 would have $77 out of that $100. The top 10 people would have $77 out of $100. The next 50 people, what we like to call the middle class in this country, would have to share $23 between them. And the 40% of our population that lives in poverty owe money. They don't have any wealth at all. They might have a house, but they owe on it, and that money goes to Wall Street. That goes to the big banks. And when you have the top 10 people with 77% of the wealth in this country, you can't expect Southern Illinois to be prosperous. You have to have enough money flowing in the community in order for prosperity. And I think you recognize that with the Geospatial Agency, which was federal dollars coming to Southern Illinois. You know, everyone wanted that. Everyone recognizes that federal dollars can bring prosperity. But why can't we choose? Why do we have to have another spy agency? We have 17 spy agencies. They're tracking everything we do. We have no privacy, where every one of us is treated like a potential criminal. Can't we do a program of social uplift instead of another spy agency?
Thank you. The next question is from Jennifer Fuller. First response will come from Mr. Bersevic.
More than 30,000 people have died by firearms every year for the last several decades, and the numbers are increasing, with more than 33,000 in the most recent year released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is a two-part question. What do you think should be done to reduce firearm deaths, and should the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention collect data on firearm deaths?
Well, let's answer the second part of your question first. Absolutely. That the CDC can't collect that information is absurd. And that's something that we need to talk about as we're going to move forward with this issue. Now, as I've stated from the first day of my campaign, I consider myself a Second Amendment advocate. But just like the First Amendment, I think there can be reasonable conversations on these issues. For example, I support the no-fly, no-buy legislation. That if you are too dangerous to fly in a plane, if you're too dangerous to board a 747, you probably shouldn't have a weapon. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're going to be having. Instead of making this topic partisan, and by the way, that's become the issue with Washington these days, partisan politics led by your current representative. If we can have conversations about meaningful reform, I think we'll start moving places. I think we'll cut down on the deaths that we're talking about. And the deaths that I know all so well about. As a part-time public defender, I've worked with families who have been terribly traumatized by those deaths. People in urban and rural communities both. It's a sincere tragedy that we have been precluded from advancing this conversation in any capacity. And hopefully, as your next representative, I'll help address that very important issue.
Ms. Bradshaw?
Yes, the CDC should track firearm deaths. I think there is some tracking right now. We know that most of those deaths from firearms are actually suicides. As far as no-fly, no-buy, this is another thing that we have had imposed on us since 2001, when we have had this massive spying, anti-democratic apparatus set up with the Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the NDAA. They've pretty much trashed the Bill of Rights. They've even trashed habeas corpus, a right we've had since the 1200s. So the no-fly list is a totally secret and unaccountable list. We have no way of knowing how you get on that list. You don't even know you're on that list until you try to fly and they tell you, oh, no, you can't. It isn't, if you don't have freedom of travel and you don't have any way to go to the government and say, what's your evidence? I mean, that's basic Fourth Amendment rights. They need to give you evidence if they're going to restrict your freedoms. So first they say you can't fly on a totally unaccountable dark list, and then they say, oh, now you can't buy because you're on this list that you didn't even know you're on. I think that we need to go back to a free society with civil liberties guaranteed by our Constitution and quit cowering in fear and allowing ourselves to be spied upon, groped, radiated, kept from flying. We can't, I had my toothpaste thrown away when I tried to fly. I'm not kidding. And they threw it away right next to them. It might be a bomb, so they threw it in the trash right next to them. Now, come on. That's proof right there that this whole thing is a farce. It is just a way to keep us not as citizens, but as subjects.
Mr. Bost.
Thank you. Yes, and just so you know, Paul was right in the fact that the no-fly list actually is flawed tremendously, and that's the problem. There would be no way for a person to remove themselves from it. We had actually one U.S. congressman that was put on the fly list, and then it took forever to try to figure out why it happened and then do the research and all of that. We must enforce our existing gun laws sensibly and to the letter. However, if you really want to look at the issue, and I'm so glad that CJ brought up the bipartisanship, because there's a bipartisanship group that is working on some real issues with this, and that's mental health. Mental health. Tim Murphy, who himself, a psychologist and a doctor that is amazing, is working with both Republicans and Democrats to try to come up with a cure and figure out where it is that we can deal with these issues and intervene early to try to reduce the amount of gun violence that's out there. We can't sacrifice everyone's freedom, though. We've got to make sure our freedoms are maintained. And we also need to know that the amount of partisanship that occurs in D.C. is actually probably less than the state of Illinois. It's just you hear it in the media. Let me tell you that I work across the aisle with all kinds of friends, and whether it's in the VA committee, whether it's Ag committee, or transportation infrastructure, working together, and we're actually getting results by working together. And I'm glad that CJ suggested that, because we've been doing it.
Next question is from Joseph Bustos to Paula Bradshaw.
In her questionnaire to the Belleville News-Democrat, Ms. Bradshaw said Scott Air Force Base is an important part of the Metro East economy. But the Green Party's New Deal platform calls for slashing defense spending by 50%. Ms. Bradshaw, how do you propose to keep Scott strong and a key part of the local economy if the Green Party platform calls for drastic cuts in defense spending? How do you reconcile those differences? And to the other candidates, what would you do, what do you see as your role in keeping Scott Air Force Base strong?
Okay, well, the United States of America spends $80 million a minute on so-called defense spending. We're bombing 6 countries right now. We have 900 bases all around the world, even where we're not wanted. We are trying to maintain an empire, and that's very, very expensive. Scott Air Force Base is not an overseas base. It is a home base, and that is what defense should be about, defending your own country and your own territory, and not going over and destroying other people's countries, other people's homes, other people's infrastructure, bombing weddings, schools, funerals. There's war crimes being committed every day by this so-called defense industry. For instance, I agree with Donald Trump that we need law and order, and one of the laws we should follow are international laws. And under international law, any aggressive war is illegal. So, and as Chief Justice Jackson said at the he was a Supreme Court justice, but he was also the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, he said, unprovoked aggression is the supreme war crime, because all subsequent war crimes are contained within the original one. And like I said, we're bombing 6 countries right now. Every single one of them is illegal, except for maybe Iraq, because we overthrew the Iraq government, put in a puppet government, and now they've asked us to help. But no other government is asking us to bomb them. And in Yemen, for instance, the Obama administration gave $115 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is now bombing Yemen. They're bombing houses, schools. They've got a blockade to where 1/3 of Yemenis are starving. And they're bombing agriculture. They're killing cows. They're bombing food silos. These are all war crimes. But you know what? They're encompassed in the original war crime, which is aggressive war.
Mr. Bost.
Thank you. Well, let me start off by saying I'm proud of St. Clair County and the region for what they do in supporting Scott Air Force Base. Let me tell you that I was in the Marine Corps in 29 Palms, California, and the community there didn't exactly support the Marines quite as well as our communities do here. And they work together. And understand, I kind of want to respond to something that was said a while ago. It was in a bipartisan manner that we aggressively tried for NGA. And we worked very, very hard, and I'm very proud of the job that we did working together to present our case. Now, we all know that it's the best location is here, but whatever politics was being played in Washington. But remember, Dick Durbin was involved with that, Mark Kern, all of the Democrats and myself were involved. So by missing not that, there was some more to that than meets the eye. That being said, let's look at Scott. Just this last week, we had Steve Womack come, and he is the chairman of HASC, because it is vitally important, the mission at Scott, to make sure that we maintain that mission. It's centrally located in the United States, but it isn't just covering those issues in the United States. There's not one single move that occurs in this world that doesn't come through Scott, that they don't know, that they are actually in control of. And I'm going to tell you, it's great having them here. I am so proud of the fact that we've got them here. And as a U.S. Congressman, I've been working with them on every front to make sure their mission is provided for, including fully funding them at their request.
Mr. Bursivic.
Thank you. Let's address something that our congressman said about bipartisanship. First of all, an independent website, govtrack.us, stated that Congressman Bost was the most partisan member of the Illinois delegation when it came to co-sponsoring bills. The most partisan. So let's remember that when we hear that he's the most bipartisan fellow on the stage. Now, NGA, as he talked about, certainly was bipartisan. There'd be no sitting member of Congress who would advocate against his own county. Let's be fair. St. Clair County did an excellent job of putting and making the site location for NGA ready. I mean, it was shovel ready when they made the announcement. It was ready for the infrastructure. It was ready for the project to start. But again, you're hearing excuses. At the federal level, Congressman Bost couldn't deliver the mail. At the federal level, Congressman Clay across the river just did a better job of advocating for his district. Now, here's what we can do for Scott Air Force Base. We need to continue to advocate like Jerry Costello did, who endorsed my candidacy. We need to continue to work for the region. What we see we've already seen the first chunk of Scott Air Force Base go away when we lost the NGA, but we can work with the DOD to continue to finance Scott Air Force Base. Right now, the proposed fiscal year budget for 2017 has higher defense spending than Ronald Reagan's proposed budgets, or his budgets back when he was the president. And we can use that money if we can advocate for the district. This district is the largest supplier of an economic impact. Scott Air Force Base has the largest economic impact in the district. And if we can't advocate for Scott, we're going to lose it. We saw with Congressman Costello, he kept Scott Air Force Base open by force of will alone. And that's the kind of representative that we need in Southern Illinois to continue to work to keep Scott open.
Our next question is from Jennifer Fuller, and it goes to Mr. Bost.
Many people believe the current laws for controlling immigration into our country are inadequate. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has called for building a wall along America's southern border with stricter limitations for Muslims, while Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton favors a path to citizenship with vetting for immigrants in so-called terrorist hotspots. What solutions would you propose and support to fix this problem if elected to Congress?
Let me let me tell you that we must control our border first. Now, Donald Trump says build a wall, build it higher. No, if you know what's going on, you need to actually, if there's certain areas you build a wall. They build a wall in Tijuana, they dig underneath, but you have to have electronic means, you need to have fencing. But why is it wrong for we, America, to have controlled borders like every other country in the nation, or in the world? Well, we must control our borders. And when we control our borders, then we can look at whatever. I'm not for amnesty. I'm not for amnesty. I believe that we should encourage people. Isn't it great to have a nation that people are trying to get into? It's a wonderful thing from that aspect. But we've got to have controls. And I'll tell you another thing that's got to be cured. For our president to go out and illegally allow Syrian refugees into this country whenever they are not properly vetted, I voted twice to make sure that we do not allow those that are not properly vetted into this nation. I'm as concerned about the children and the people that are leaving Syria as anyone else. But I'm more concerned about our children and our grandchildren. and making them safe. And let me follow up on one more thing, and that's where I'm out on borders, but let me follow up on one more thing. CJ, I know Jerry Costello, and you're no Jerry Costello.
Mr. Bersevic. All right, everyone. All right. Let Mr. Bersevic answer.
My turn?
Yes, sir, your turn.
Is that the old Jack Kennedy line? You can't even come up with your own material? Are you kidding me?
All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So
proceed.
The question was on immigration. I'll address Syrian refugees in a second. Listen, we live in a country where citizens are afraid of their own security in their own homes. And frankly, that's something we have to address. We need comprehensive immigration reform. Before this presidential campaign started, comprehensive reform was a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats were working together for a common sense solution. And both parties were talking about paths to citizenship. Since this presidential campaign started, we've lost that. We do need stronger borders. We need to dedicate resources to making sure that anybody who wants to come into this country does so legally and does so with the intentions of improving the American economy. We need to make sure that we are still a great place for doctors from other countries to want to come and practice. It's a big issue, but it can be done, and it can be done with bipartisan support. Now, the Syrian refugee issue is a little different. Let's define exactly what a refugee is. By definition, a refugee is somebody who would rather not be here. A refugee is somebody who's leaving their own country because they can't stay there anymore. We need to vet those refugees. We need to make sure that those people that want to enter this country, first of all, deserve asylum, and second of all, are safe people who want to advocate for the ideals of this country. But, let's think about what we've talked about today. Mr. Boss just said that there are dangerous people that illegally came in through this border, but he's okay with giving them a gun even if they can't fly in our planes.
All right, Ms. Bradshaw, your response.
Well, actually, I think it was the United States responsible for putting a whole lot of guns into Mexico with Fast and Furious. Yeah, there are all kinds of refugees, and I don't understand why anyone that comes over this border is considered an immigrant instead of a visitor or a refugee. If you look at what people are fleeing, in Mexico, people are fleeing NAFTA. NAFTA was even worse for Mexican workers and farmers than it was for our workers. So yeah, they are economic refugees, and they're coming over the border, and we already have border control, and we already have labor laws. The problem is they aren't being enforced. I know you don't like rules, but rules are what make a civilized country work. And if you allow employers to hire people who are here illegally, because then they don't have to obey the labor laws, they don't have to pay them as much, they can work them in unsafe conditions, that is the pull that brings the refugees over, and the push is economic refugees like in Mexico from NAFTA, Honduras, where the United States overthrew the government, and now it's the most violent country in Central America. Those Honduran refugees are fleeing violence caused by our government. Same as in Ukraine. There's over 1 million refugees from Ukraine because the United States helped overthrow the elected government in 2014. As far as the rest of the world's refugees, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, does that sound familiar to anyone? Why are these people fleeing their countries? Because they're being bombed out, and mostly they're being bombed out by the United States government and our $80 million a minute that the Green Party wants to cut that you seem to think is so outrageous. Yeah, Scott Air Force Base is the biggest cash cow in this district. We all know that, and you should be able to apply that going, wow, if federal funds bring that much money into a community, what could federal funds do for programs of social uplift instead of spy agencies and war machine?
Next question is from Molly Parker of the Southern Illinoisan to Mr. Bersevic.
For more than a year now, the Southern Illinoisan has documented circumstances that have led to inhumane public housing conditions for several hundred people living in government-funded housing in Cairo. One of the most troubling revelations, and there were many, was that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development officials, particularly those in the Chicago office, were aware of problems dating back years. Even since HUD's takeover in February, there are children in Alexander County that continue to live in substandard conditions. With more than 3,000 public housing authorities across the country, what do you propose should be done to ensure better oversight of government-funded housing and subsidized housing?
So first of all, let's give credit where credit is due. Thank you, Mr. Boss, for everything you've done on that issue and continue to do. He's done it since he's been there, since the issue came up, and frankly, it needed federal oversight. You know, we have to do a better job of making sure, first of all, that the dollars that we allocate to agencies are spent appropriately. And one of the ways that we can do that is by trying to get the best and the brightest of folks in the state, in our district, and in the country to work as part of these federal agencies. That's something that we've experienced pretty negatively here in the district. You know, I've got two brothers and a sister, all three of which are much more talented than I am, and they all live across the river. We need to retain our talent in this district, and we need to make sure that that talent is appropriately used in investigating issues like this. We need to make sure that the dollars allocated are spent appropriately. We need to make sure that the people that are spending those dollars are vetted, and we can make sure that they're good for the job that they're slated to do. And we need to make sure that we do a fundamental job of advocating for this district from top to bottom as we move forward.
Ms. Bradshaw.
We need to follow the rules. There are rules that govern public housing, just like there are all other public entities. We need accountants, we need auditors, we need to follow housing inspectors, we need to follow the rules. We need public housing. It fills a need, and there's people who are too poor to buy houses because housing is so expensive in this country right now. So we do need public housing. As far as bringing money back into the district, again, you know, can we not think of better ways than the NGA to bring money into this district? This ties in with gun violence and drugs because the NGA is one of the 17 spy agencies that we are funding in this country, and they watch the satellites. Now, these satellites are supposed to protect us from natural and man-made disasters. For instance, if they can actually read this, if I was outside, from outer space. They can see everything. So they're supposed to be watching for fires and floods and things like that. And they're also supposed to be watching for terrorism and drug running. Now, ever since the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2001, the heroin production in that country has skyrocketed by 4,000 times. We're talking tons and tons and tons of heroin being produced right under the noses of the U.S. occupying forces, and then coming over to this country, and we've had skyrocketing, go figure, heroin addiction, heroin overdoses, gun battles in the streets, because when you bring over 4,000 tons of heroin, it has to be distributed to ordinary people. The street-level drug distributorships are the ones who are fighting over market share with actual guns. So you have people being shot down dead over market share in our inner cities for the low-level drug distributors. The NGA ought to be able to figure that out.
Thank you. If I can get back to the question. Let me say that I am proud of our staff on what we did as far as the housing in Carroll. But it is a larger problem than just Carroll. When we went to work on this, what we discovered was many members that have been in Congress for some time have been noticing this. We all want local control, and because of that, we put our housing control boards in place. But we have to make sure that the people that we're putting in place to operate those, as CJ said, are well vetted. Because the problems exist when we get corruption in those boards. And it happens. So we have to watch very, very closely. Now HUD has come in, and we're waiting on a report at this time specifically for Carroll. And Carroll's in a rough situation. It's one of our communities that we're fighting for to try to bring jobs back to. We're trying to help them. They're a food desert. And that's what it means to be the congressman. Knowing and understanding those issues and going in and working on them and understanding how to get some help where they can be helped and give them freedom where they need freedom.
Next question is from Joseph Bustos to Paula Bradshaw first.
Voters say they're tired of negative advertising, mudslinging, and name-calling in politics. To that end, please give us one thing you appreciate about your opponents.
TPP and that you are now opposed to it. I think that's good. Well, you voted to fast track it, and that's kind of like... Okay, the TPP is not just an assault on American workers, it's also assault on our national sovereignty. It is giving up our free government or our democratic government such as it is and turning over the laws and the regulations and the rules that you don't like. But what it would do was if Congress passed a law that a corporation said would interfere with its profits, they could sue, and we, the taxpayers, would have to pay that private corporation for what they say were their lost profits. That is a massive assault on our national sovereignty, and I'm glad that you no longer support it. And CJ, I'm glad that you are supporting bringing federal dollars into the district. I hope you can broaden your idea of what federal dollars we could actually use, how we could use our federal dollars.
Mr. Bost.
Thank you. Let me say that I think the thing I can say about each of these candidates, and I'll do it all at once, is that they put their name on the ballot. That's not an easy thing to do, and it is very tough on your family, whether it's your spouse or your children, and it is a tough thing to do, to stand up before a crowd like this in a time when people want to bring anger into this process instead of studying the issues and working on the issues. We see it on the national level. But I do respect them for putting their name on the ballot. I work very hard to try to make sure that it's a civil debate that we have here. But I'm the incumbent, and I think that's kind of, that's why you get the guns, but that's okay. I can take that. But each one of us, by putting our name on the ballot, deserves recognition for doing that, ladies and gentlemen, because it's very difficult sometimes to encourage people to be involved in the process, because what they can see what it does to you. If you're a business person, how that can hurt you. If you're a family person, how that can hurt you, because you go through these negative campaigns. I'm really glad that this one is not as negative as what's going on the national scene, and I thank my opponents for that.
Mr. Bersevic.
So I'll go one at a time. First of all, Mr. Bost, I've had the pleasure of being able to work with you, and that's what I consider this over the last 18 months, and it's been a very grueling and challenging process. You've been doing this for a long time, and my hat's off to you for that. Public service is something that I was raised around. My dad was a public servant. My grandfather, my uncle were public servants. It's a calling. It gets in your blood. It's what you want to do. You run because you want to help. And even though I disagree with the congressman on a lot of the issues, he wants to help. And so does Paula. And Paula is idealistic. And damn the torpedoes for Paula. That she has worked. This is the third time that she's done this. I've listened to her speak several times. She's intelligent. She knows the issues. And although it's an uphill fight, she continues to fight. So thank you for that.
Next question is from Molly Parker to Mr. Bost.
Illinois' pension debt is at $111 billion and rising. It's a large number. We've seen cities like Detroit declare bankruptcy to negotiate a way out of crippling debt. Should the federal government allow something similar for states? Should they offer a bailout of another type? Or do you have another solution to this crisis of unfunded promises that has led the state to spiraling out of financial control?
The state is where we need bipartisanship to work on these issues. If you'll remember the negative ads 2 years ago, that was what we were trying to do, was try to cure the problem, but yet Mike Madigan brought forward and changed a bill we'd been working on for a year and a half. As far as the federal government bailout, I don't think you would be able to get it past the Congress, and that's because there's about 4 states tops that are in this type situation. So that means the states are going to have to find revenue streams to reimburse and fully fund, come back and fund their pension systems. I've given some suggestions to those members in the Illinois General Assembly, and I will continue to advise them and tell them where I can. But the reality is it must be handled at the state level. But let me tell you that we have a real issue in the federal government that we need to make sure that we don't go down this same path with Medicare and Social Security. We have to protect them at all cost and make sure that these systems don't fall under the same problem that the pension systems do. I believe that we should do everything we can to make sure that those that are already receiving Social Security and Medicaid continue to receive it, and those that are incoming to it will receive it at the level it was promised. But we have to have an adult conversation on how to deal with this in the future so that we can protect these and keep them viable for our children and grandchildren. And you know what? We also can't go down the path of Obamacare and steal $700 billion from Medicare to try to make it work.
Mr. Bursevic.
So I think it's a two-part question. First of all, I don't think the federal government should be in the business of bailing out individual states. First of all, although Illinois is in dire financial situation, there is still a path out for Illinois. Frankly, there's an amendment that you can vote on if you have not already on November 8th that suggests that money that's allocated to certain funds may only be used for that intended fund. In this case, it's highway roads and bridges and infrastructure. And that's a good first step. We need to make sure that our funds are not used as piggy banks for other projects, that we can budget appropriately just like we do at home, that we can make sure that as we move forward, funds are appropriately allocated. Now, assuming we can get our house in order in terms of where money comes from, we have to do another thing at both the federal and state level, and that's open up new streams of revenue. One of the ways we can open up new streams of revenue is by making sure that women are paid the same as men. That is a $500 billion difference if women were paid the same as men. And that's an increased revenues. These are clearly areas where I differ from the congressman because he's voted against it. We can open up new revenue streams, we can use money as it was appropriately intended, and then we won't have to worry about bailing out our states.
Ms. Bradshaw.
I question why we owe $111 billion. Who do we owe this money to? 2/3 of the current workers are already contributing to the cost of the retired workers' payments. So the rest of it, I'll tell you where it's going. It's going to Wall Street, the same as most of our money in this country. It's the same as the 401ks. When the economy crashed in 2008, that people's 401k wealth disappeared, and they were told, well, now you have to put more money in from your paycheck to make up for it. That's exactly what we're being told in Illinois, and I question it. I think we should go to a pay-as-you-go system where the current workers pay it forward, where the current workers pay for the retired workers with maybe a little help from the state, and then when they retire, then the workers that come up can do this. I don't think that we have to come up with $111 billion to pay Wall Street when they're already getting $85 billion a month and have been getting $85 billion a month all through the Obama administration to bail out Wall Street. All of that goes onto our debt. When you have people that are so rich, they don't pay their share. They spend it on frivolities like private jets and private islands and, trips to Africa to kill endangered animals, but they also are sitting on $2 trillion overseas, which they are not bringing back, and they need to, and we could put a tax on them. In Illinois, we have quite a high sales tax in all of our, our daily purchases, but on LaSalle Street, the Chicago Board of Trade and the Mercantile Exchange pay not one red cent. They don't pay any sales taxes on any of their transactions. If we would put a sales tax on their transactions, we could raise billions of dollars for this state. And also we could have a state bank where we could put pension funds instead of in Wall Street.
Next question is from Joseph Bustos to Mr. Bursevic.
People in the Mississippi River Valley often worry about whether they have adequate flood protection. The Metro East itself has been working to improve its area levees to bring them up to a 100-year flood certification. Eventually, the Metro East leaders plan to bring them to a 500-year flood level certification. But there have been questions about when there would be financial assistance from the federal government for those projects. What should federal policy be to ensure levees, dams, and other flood prevention infrastructure are built and in place?
Thank you. So there are two big issues here. First, we need to allocate more dollars federally to levee protection. This is one of the things that farmers rely on for crop insurance, and without adequate levees, we're in trouble. One of the big issues with levies is until they're broken, nobody has the conversation. So we need to fund these things well in advance. And as I've campaigned over the last 18 months, I've talked to folks who've told me directly that they are concerned about the status of their levies. So, out of office and without being a congressman, I established a public-private ventureship between the levee districts, contractors, and the Army Corps of Engineers to start repairing levees right now. And I'm very proud to say that just a week ago in Randolph and Monroe County, we started fixing levees. The Army Corps of Engineers told us that was a $2 million project. But if we could get it done, we could do it. And guess what? We did. That's the kind of advocacy that this district has to have. Certainly, we've got to allocate more dollars. But let's be honest, whoever wins this job will just be one seat out of the entire Congress. Advocacy is just important. We've got to be done with excuses. We have to start fighting for the district. We have to start doing. This is a district that is inherent with opportunity. We should stop talking about opportunity lost, get our hands dirty just like you do as workers in this district, and start fighting.
Paula Bradshaw, your response.
Well, of course, part of the Green New Deal is a massive investment, federal investment in our infrastructure, and that would include flood protection. I would say, though, that we should go by what the Army Corps of Engineers recommends, and if they recommend some sort of other flood protection than just building a higher levee, well, then we should go with what they say because they are the experts in this sort of thing. As I said, the Green New Deal, it wants to improve our infrastructure, which is crumbling, not just our levees, but our railroads and our bridges, and you know, so many of our public works are in need of repair and replacement. So yeah, we need to have federal investment, and that includes flood protection. Maybe we could have crop set-asides so that, you know, that we can have some sort of buffer, wetland buffer that absorbs any kind of floods. I mean, that's what they used to do, and you know, sometimes the old ways are the best.
Representative Bost.
First off, let me tell you I'm proud of what our office has been doing to work with the Army Corps of Engineers. We have had some very serious situations occur. Let me tell you that also, after being put on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, what you need to understand about the Illinois 12th is that it's the only district in the United States that has 3 navigable waterways. Because of that, you have to know about the locks and dams, and you also have to know about the levees. I've been stacking sandbags on levees since I was old enough to shovel sand. And I'm going to tell you that when Lynn Small levee broke, and we sat and tried to figure out what we could do, and the Army Corps of Engineers came to us, and when they checked against the dollars that you have to have of long-term effects, they couldn't, under the existing criteria, get the dollars to make that replacement. But yet, just a month or 2 ago, we were able to use their own request to create new language that will allow them to go back in and repair that. But this isn't the first time I've been able to work with the levees. My last piece of legislation in the Illinois State Legislature was to make sure that some money who had been set aside in Jackson County for the repair of the Grand Tower levee was, because of some laws that had actually stopped us from using it because of the length of time frame that the levy for the levees had been in place. We were able to go back and recoup those dollars and make those repairs, and thank heaven we got them done before the holiday flood.
Next question comes from WSIU's Jennifer Fuller, and it goes first to Paula Bradshaw.
When it comes to higher education, the cost is pricing some students out of a college degree. How do you ensure education for those who want it without saddling them with thousands of dollars in debt upon completion? Is it a lower interest rate, allowing discharging of the debt in bankruptcy, or are there other ideas that you have?
I think the college education should be free to those qualified and willing to go to, or who want to go to college. This is not pie-in-the-sky idealism. This is something that many, many other countries around the world have, including Brazil, including most of the industrialized nations, including Libya before we destroyed that country. They had free higher education also. So, number one, I think higher education should be free. I think that students should be allowed to go bankrupt. This is what happens when you have a corrupt Congress. When they redid the bankruptcy laws right before the crash of 2008, they made it so more difficult for ordinary American citizens to get bankruptcy, to go bankrupt. They made it easier for corporations. They made it impossible for students. If you're 90 years old living on Social Security, you might still be paying off your student debt because the interest rates are so high. And this is outrageous. I don't think that health or education should be for profit. I don't think prisons or war should be for profit either, but health and education definitely should not be for profit, and we should look at it as an investment in our future, a way to create more educated citizens, more well-balanced, well-rounded citizens, and make a better country. Why do we import 1/3 of our doctors? Is it true that no Americans want to be doctors? Why is it that we have to bring doctors in from the rest of the world? I think that we should, if an American student wants to be a doctor and they're smart enough and they get good grades and they're willing to work, that should be free, and they shouldn't have a $500,000 debt that they have to pay off. So yeah, I mean, it cripples the younger generation to have this kind of student debt. It really does. It makes it so they're paying Wall Street again, that 40% of our population that works only to make that one man richer, that's students.
Mike Bost.
Thank you, Jack. There was a bill that I co-sponsored that actually allows parents and grandparents to have a larger threshold of money that they can set aside and take a tax deduction on while saving for college for their students. But that's not enough. We've got to work to try to get those costs down. And one thing we also need to do, we've been working with our trade schools around to make sure that we give an opportunity for those students that don't want to go to a full four-year degree, that we work with those trade universities to actually send them into different type jobs if that's what they desire, and make it more affordable in that way. We've got to be able to allow the universities to compete on a market status and encourage them to work to get their costs down. Our states, the state of Illinois, unfortunately, over the last 12 years, where it was used to be that we took and whatever we put in elementary and secondary education, whatever we put in education as a whole, 2/3 went to elementary and secondary, 1 went to higher. The reason why the state of Illinois has their tuitions climbing is because we quit doing that.
C.J. Bersevic.
Thank you. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. As some of you have probably heard me tell you, if I'm lucky enough to be your next representative, I think I'll be one of the only members of Congress with student loan debt, and it ain't no fun. And since day one, I mean, I can appreciate the value of that debt. When an individual decides to go to college, he is making, or vocational school, he or she is making an inherent investment in themselves. They want to make their district, their town, the American economy a better place. And so I've always advocated for fair, although not free, tuition. Tuition costs have exponentially increased against the rate of the dollar over the last 40 years, and that's got to stop. Now, there are ways that we can try to finance some of this burden. We can close corporate and mega wealthy tax loopholes for guys like Mr. Boss Buddy Bruce Rauner and the folks that the big corporations that are avoiding paying taxes by placing their headquarters overseas. We can make them pay their fair share. Almost $800 billion is lost every year because corporations don't pay their fair share. But in the meantime, there are still things that we can do to make sure that college is affordable. And one of those is to make sure that our federal student loan program is reasonable, that we're not reaping benefit from the payment plans of the students that graduate, and that we allow Pell Grants to continue. Mike Bost voted to freeze Pell Grants for 10 years. He voted under the Ryan budget to freeze Pell Grants for 10 years. That precludes investment in oneself, that precludes investment in the district, and that makes college unbelievably unaffordable. College and vocational school should not be avenues for economic advancement only for the wealthy. This should be an opportunity for everyone like myself to get a college degree and be able to pay it off.
Molly Parker from the Southern Illinoisan has a question that first goes to Mr. Bost.
Thousands of former coal miners face losing their health care benefits as coal companies have filed bankruptcy, and the United Mine Workers of America says its pension system is on the brink of collapse. This is a multi-part question. Do you support the UMWA's push to provide taxpayer funds to protect these retired miners' health care? Also, what about their pensions? Because those are separate questions. And on the latter, if you support the bailout on the pensions, what concern do you have about the precedent this may set for others who seek that assistance, such as the Central States Pension Fund of the Teamsters Union?
Okay. First off, to the United Mine Workers. Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm co-sponsor of the bill, and the reason I'm co-sponsor of the bill is because it has a revenue stream. There is a revenue stream that is located whenever we have the Mine Reclamation Fund that was put in years ago. It does not take away from the Mine Reclamation Fund, but it uses the interest off of the Mine Reclamation Fund to go and help these United Mine Workers where these companies have wrongly, because I don't think it was the intent of the law to allow them to switch the company name, sell the company out, then the company they sold it out to goes bankrupt, and then the other company goes on with non-union labor. That's a problem. We need to look at that and somehow get that corrected, that can't happen. We also need to, when you talk about the Central States, yeah, I'm real concerned about that, because a collapse of the Central States would be so devastating, the funds we have to help them out would be depleted instantly. So we are working with the Central State Teamsters right now to try to figure out some kind of plan. But let me tell you that it was not the government that did this, and unfortunately it's the government that's going to have to come in and help them, but the government, the union members paid in, the companies paid in. It was poor management on the Teamsters themselves, not the individual members, but the people that were at the head. They handled it terribly. And we are going to have other ones that their pension systems, other companies or other pension systems that I'm afraid will go into this. We are going to have to come up with some sensible ideas. This is a place where we need to set in a bipartisan manner, make sure we come up with the ideas, because it'll be devastating to our seniors, those that have retired.
C.J. Bersevic.
First of all, so do I. Absolutely, I support the United Mine Workers and their movement to have their pensions secured. But when the congressman tells you things like he is in favor of supporting the pensioners of the United Mine Workers pension, he's also on the other side of his mouth saying he's not advocating for state pensioners in other capacities. Mr. Boss is no friend of labor. The AFL-CIO gave him a 28% labor rating when he was in the State House. Now that he has been elected to Congress, he needs those union votes to stay in office. I have been advocating for organized labor since I got out of law school. I worked at Granite City Steel as a member of 439. I helped repair Route 3 as a member of Local 100 out of East St. Louis. That is where and why I run for office. It's the workers in this district that are the primary concern. I was lucky enough to get the steelworkers endorsement over an incumbent while we are fighting bad trade deals. That was because since day one of not just my campaign but of my professional career, I've reached out and helped negotiate on behalf of working people. I sued the governor at 28 years old, which let me tell you is pretty scary, on behalf of working people, because that's the kind of advocacy that we need, not just in the private sector, but on behalf of working people in Congress. One of the ways that we'll be able to make sure that every single pension fund is permanently funded is to make sure the people that pay into those funds pay into those funds. UFCW has a similar issue, and they're underfunded because of large store owners in Cook County won't pay their fair share. We have to make sure that those that make promises to labor, whether you are an independent business owner, whether you're a big corporation, or whether you're in government, you live up to those promises. And I can tell you this, if I'm elected, I always will.
Paul Bradshaw.
Well, I find it interesting, Mr. Boss, that you said that you pointed out a problem was that the miners paid into it and the companies paid into it. And then they did a little sleight of hand with the bankruptcy laws. Interestingly enough, student debt you can't go bankrupt, but you can if you're a coal company. And you said we can't go after the coal mine owners. Why not? I would say that is because of corruption in our government. The kind of corruption that leads to laws being passed to benefit the 1%, to benefit the coal mine owners and not the coal miners, to benefit the speculators on Wall Street and not the workers. The TPP would would harm workers in this particular way relevant to coal and steel. The TPP, ever since the original New Deal of FDR, they have had a provision in the laws that if you're going to build American infrastructure, you should use American labor and resources. This is something that other states and local people have adopted over the years, that, you know, we want to favor our own people, we want to favor American people. Under the TPP, that would be illegal. You could get sued for that. If you said, we want to put granite steelworkers back to work building the infrastructure for sustainable transportation that we need to fight climate change, they would say, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. You have to buy Chinese steel, or a Chinese steel company could sue the United States of America. This is wrong. The TPP is wrong, and it needs to be opposed. As far as the economic advantage of going, all right, the thing about college is you shouldn't have to go to college to have a living wage. If you put in your hours of work, you should be paid enough to live on, to be able to buy a house, buy your food, afford transportation.
Thanks very much. We've got time for one more question. This is going to come from Joseph Bustos. First to Mr. Bersevic.
After being elected, part of the job is relating to everyday people. How would you relate to the Ken Bones of the world?
Ken Bone. So, Ken Bone, that's actually a great question. Ken Bone works at a power plant, and I've worked at a power plant, first of all, so check that off the list. I was lucky enough to work side by side with folks for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week at Granite City Steel, okay? Those folks aren't working. They're either unemployed or underemployed because of unfair trade legislation. When I worked out of the labor hall, I worked with people who made a fair wage, but when work left, so did their jobs. And as an advocate for working people in a private capacity, I talk to people every day about the struggles of just paying their bills. It's a big issue. We have to work together. We have to have bipartisan support if we're going to have common sense legislation to move the economy forward. Whether you're from Alton, Belleville, Carbondale, or Cairo, everyone tells us, and they'll both agree with me, that the most important issue is the economy, is their job. Will they be able to continue to put food on their family's table? The tragedy of the modern economy is that it's left Southern Illinois behind. And folks that we talk to tell us regularly that they think both parties have left them, that there's no more advocacy for working folks. And let me tell you, there are only so many votes that you can take once elected. The real champion of working people is going to be the person that advocates for them on a daily basis, that goes out and makes sure that they're at least heard, because that's what we need, a voice. And that's what I have always wanted to be for this district.
Paula Bradshaw.
So Ken Bone didn't have a job before that coal mine opened. I'm sure he took it because he needed a job, just like the rest of us. Most of us will take any job that we can get. And so if it pays good or better than, Walmart, then we will take that job. The whole point of having a government that works for the people and not for the corporations is that we can choose as a democracy what kind of work we want our people to do. What kind of country do we want to have? Do we really want to have a country that relies on war and prisons and destroying the environment for profit? Is that really the kind of country we would choose if we, the people, had a voice in our government, instead of just the undue effect of the very, very wealthy? I think that Ken Bone would be just as happy with any other living wage job, and just like the rest of us would. So that is what the Green New Deal is about, and it's for, as I said, a living wage for everyone, not just the college educated. And as, in terms of pensions and such, we need to keep our social pension system strong and healthy. If we had single-payer health care, funding health insurance wouldn't be such a horrible, scary thing. It wouldn't be so expensive, and you wouldn't have to have people going bankrupt if they get sick. So we need to keep Social Security strong by lifting the cap. We need to turn Medicare into Medicare for all by removing the 3 words over 65 from it. And that would solve the whole problem of workers being so very afraid of losing their jobs and their health care. It would take that fear away. Why should we have to live like this in the richest country in the world?
Mike Bost.
Well, first off, the question was how we would relate to Ken Bones, and let me tell you that I was actually around when the power plant was built that he worked in. I'm glad that they've got it there, and I think it's important to understand that if certain regulations are put in place, that plant could shut down. But not just Ken Bones, but every person that's in my district I can relate to. I've been a firefighter, a union firefighter. I understand the unions. I understand why it is that we have to have our unions. My whole family on my mother's side were coal miners. Back whenever, if it wasn't for the unions forming up, they would just bury you and move on. Let me tell you that whether it's farmers, because the business I was in the trucking business, hauling grain out of the field and fertilizer to the field and the anhydrous ammonia and working side by side with the farmers. So the United Mine Workers endorsement. And yes, and even working with educators. I'm the one that got the NEA endorsement. That's not good. That's not normally done for Republicans. That's because I'm able to work and relate with everyone in the district to achieve what we need to achieve and to make sure that my votes, whether they line up with my party or whether they line up with the unions, are taken with my constituents in Southern Illinois being number one. That has always been my position. It will continue to be my position. Regardless of what someone might say on this stage, I am proud of what we do and how I work for my constituents and how I keep in touch with them. And I can relate with Ken Bones, and I can relate with the business owner. I can relate with anybody else that is in this district and understand what their concerns are. And I look forward to continuing to do that.
Time for closing statements. The first closing statement is from C.J. Bersevic.
So you heard from our incumbent that I'm no Jerry Costello. And he's right. I'm not. But I sure would like to be. He stood for everything that makes this district what it is. That's why I'm so honored to have his endorsement. As we move forward as a district, as a voting base, we have to consider what is important. We have to realize that the votes that our congressmen, that our elected officials are taking every day directly affect our lives. Whether it's affordable care, whether it's student loan debt, whether it's equal pay. These are things that your legislators are going to vote on, and they've got to vote the right way. We're moving into a transitioning economy that's going to deal with the realities of climate change and the absolute burden of maintaining our workforce and the struggle that we have to make sure workers are always a priority. We need a voice in Washington to do that, and I can be that voice. I have worked tirelessly since I've graduated from law school to work on behalf of working people. It's been a true privilege, and it's why, when this opportunity arose, community leaders asked me to run for the position. It's been a true honor. I've got to meet so many folks from Alton to Cairo to Mount Vernon. We talk about the issues, and they're concerned that they're not heard. And it sure seems to be the case. So here's our opportunity. Let's be loud. Let's be heard. Let's go get them. This is the opportunity for change, to move forward, to have these difficult conversations that we'll have to move a modern economy forward. It's going to be difficult, and we need the best and brightest there. I look forward to representing you. I look forward to working for you, and I look forward to being your voice.
Paula Bradshaw. Thanks very much. Let's give Paula her time.
Okay, this is the third time I've run, and each time I have put forward a pretty solid social democracy kind of platform. And I've been told that it's not viable, it's not realistic, it's just not, it can't be done. However, almost every country in Europe has a better kind of system, a more equal system than us with a social democracy safety net, such as pensions, health, education, and all those other things that make life pleasant in this world. The United States, as Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, we can have democracy in America, or we can have great concentrations of wealth, but we can't have both. As I pointed out, the top 10% own 77% of the wealth in this country. You can think that they're going to trickle it down to you, but I think that you should know by now that they're not going to do that. The only countries with greater inequality than us are Mexico, Turkey, and Chile. So we've got some pretty poor competitors on that level. We need to tax the rich. We need to tax corporations. We need to follow the rules. Lowering regulation just leads to death. Regulations are there to protect the workers. I come from a coal mining family too. Actually, my great-grandfathers went into mines when they were 6 and 8 years old. My grandpa went in when he was 12. My uncles all went in. Only my dad didn't. He worked at the company store. And they worked to organize the UMW back in the day. And for a while, yeah, coal mining was a good job. And, they didn't like it, though, I can tell you that. I don't know. I knew all my dad's cousins, my uncle, none of them liked it, but they liked the money. That's what they liked. And I think that we can do better than we are doing now. We have to turn, we have seen from the popularity of Bernie Sanders that Americans do want a stronger social safety net, a stronger social democratic system, and that's what I stand for.
Mike Bost.
First off, I want to say thank you to the panel, and Jack, thank you for the moderating, and thank you to the audience for being here. Let me tell you that I've heard some rhetoric up here that is not necessarily factual. And that's okay. That's the way this process works. But I'm going to tell you this. If you don't believe that I'm not going to stand for you in every opportunity and stand for Southern Illinois, whenever I've received the endorsement of the Farm Bureau, the firefighters, UMWA, the NEA, and the list goes on and on, bipartisan groups. Why? Because I understand what goes on in the 12th. And how to deliver that message in Washington and fight for you and in this district. I want to thank a few other people while I'm here, though. When you put yourself out on the line for the jobs like this, your spouse has to take a lot. And Tracy, thank you. Thank you. And let me say this. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve you in Washington, D.C. It's one of the proudest things I've ever done in my life. And I'm asking for your vote on the 8th to send me back to continue to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have the greatest nation in the world. Regardless of whether we have two candidates fighting for president and the rhetoric that goes on, it's still the greatest nation in the world. Isn't it amazing, as I said earlier tonight, that people are trying to fight to get in, not trying to fight to get out? I thank God. I thank you. And God bless America.
We've come to the end of our debate. Let's thank all the candidates, C.J. Barsevic, Paula Bradshaw, and Mike Bost. We also want to thank our panelists for tonight. Joseph Bustos of the Belleville News Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Broadcasting, and Molly Parker of the Southern Illinoisan. Thanks also to our wonderful hosts here at Lindenwood University for all the hard work that went into preparing this event. We appreciate it. Thank you. You've been a terrific audience. Good night from Belleville.
Support comes from Scott McClatchy of Alliance Investment Planning Group, Carbondale, providing investment advice and financial planning. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. AllianceInvestmentPlanning.com. Support comes from Cedarhurst Center for the